County Planning Commission, invocation, Mr. Root.
Pray with me if you'd like. Father, thank you for this day that you made, and thank you for creating us and experiencing life, an abundant life, relationships and work. Work is a blessing, that can help us to do good work this evening. From all sides, help us to be thoughtful, mindful of others, and to be efficient with time, which is a precious gift also. We're praying in it. Amen.
Frankie, you want to lead us?
I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item number 4, approval of the minutes from November 20th.
We got a little correction on the public comment. It's the TND, not TRD.
Yes, sir.
Any other comments or corrections?
And number 5, I think, should be SYNC. Number 8, I believe that's Planning Commission. And there's WANT should be WONT.
This is number 8 of the minutes?
And
Okay, slow down a little bit.
number 9, about halfway in the middle, the word places is misspelled.
Put an updated version on your desk, sir.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was gonna make a recommendation that the updated version be approved as sent out.
Okay.
Okay.
Number 10's got my name misspelled.
TND.
Miss McPhail? No.
I can retire if there's somebody else.
Yeah. Yes, sir. I believe those got fixed.
Do I have a motion to approve with corrections?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Public comment. We have 3. Jim Codner.
Mr. Chairman and members of the commission, my name is, for the record, Jim Codner. I represent Advocates for Quality Development. We in turn represent the interests of about 7,000 property holders around the lake. And I see you have on the agenda tonight the lake overlay, specifically the vegetative buffer. I just want to emphasize that to us folks, that's an extremely important part of the county ordinances. It's what provides basic protections to the lake and to our backyards. So I urge you to be very careful as you contemplate these regulations and if you make any changes. There's 2 major issues that I could identify with the lake overlay. One is silt fences, and the other is clear cutting of vegetation and trees. As far as silt fences go, first thing you got to do is you got to install them properly. Many times that's just not done, and I know it's a real pain for builders to do that and make sure it's done properly, but that's something that's got to be done. And then you got to maintain the silt fence. If indeed you have siltation and water runoff, silt fences are going to get filled up. You've got to maintain them. The reason to bring this up is there's a letter making the rounds from Ed Akamic about an incident that happened on a lot in the peninsula where a fellow bought a lot and built his home. Guy next door then came in and built his home. He's got silt problems all over the place. Silt's running down to the lake, silt's running across onto this fellow's property. silt's running down into his dock area. It's just being a major, major problem for not only him, but also the lake in general, where the silt's running into the lake. He's tried working with Duke, he's tried working with the county, he's tried working anywhere which way he can, he's getting no satisfaction. So it's obvious that even though when you identify a problem, it's obviously there's no way to deal with the problem effectively from the property owner's point of view. The second issue is clear cutting. We've all heard of incidents where people have come in, the first thing they do when they're going to build a house, they clear cut, or they clear out a lot of vegetation, a lot of trees that really shouldn't come out. The issues there needs to be some way, if you're going to control that, there needs to be some way to tell what the property looks like before it's disturbed. It does no good if a guy gets his building permit, comes on the property, does all the clear cutting, and then someone calls the county or calls Duke or calls somebody and says, hey, he cut down all his trees. Well, nobody knows what it looked like beforehand. No one took pictures or, did something to identify what the property looked like beforehand. So how are you going to say what he did look like and what he should look like after he does any remediation? There's no starting point. And there's no enforcement, again. It's very difficult to get enforcement once something's been done. So I'd implore you to look at those issues and see if you can do something about those as primary interest for folks around the lake. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Markovich?
Good evening, I am Tom Markovich, and I want to talk a little bit about the buffer. Again, I would think that the main problem we've got to deal with here is silt fences. That's the number one thing that we're talking, that's what this problem arose from, and we really do need to hammer that down. But I see in the language, we keep trying to maneuver around and tweak the language of the buffer in such a way that I don't know what that's accomplishing, and I'll tell you why. In the past, when the buffer first came in, it was a part of the performance standards, and there was a trigger mechanism. In other words, if you wanted to create a subdivision or you wanted to pull a site plan or whatever, there was a trigger mechanism there. It was an automatic thing, and you had to abide by the buffer. Well, when zoning came along, they decided, well, we're going to move it over into the zoning thing, and then for a while, they had another trigger. Only that one wasn't real smart because what they were doing was making you record an easement, and that was probably a takings and was probably getting ready to be challenged, and then the county decided to change it, which was smart. What I don't see in there now, it just says it's a standard. And then we go back, and I know the last time I talked about this, I talked about the ability to be able to kind of put a stop on somebody's builder permit if that's what the problem is, if somebody's building and that's where the silt's getting in. And then we kind of referred back and talked about the property maintenance code. And that property maintenance code is discussed in there now. I think talking about the property maintenance code is a little bit of that's a tough one because the hole that you have to try to get through is about the size of the little hole in a needle. And so it really comes down to how we define a premises. And although technically, according to the code, you can say a vacant lot is a premises, and so you're bound by this particular standard. But at the same time, I mean, what differentiates somebody who has decided to build from any other vacant lot that's out there that nobody's ever decided to build on? What's the difference in these two? What's the trigger mechanism that's going to impose? So I think all this other stuff to do with the boundary, with the buffer, I don't know why we're trying to reinvent what it is. We need to deal with the silt fences, and that's what's going to protect the lake. And I think we just need to narrow it down to there and, put some teeth in there. But anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Mike Smith is on the list to speak. He has to speak before we, he's got a PowerPoint presentation that we're gonna listen to before we discuss the vegetative buffer, if there's no objections. All right, staff update?
Yes, sir. We've noticed a little slowdown in building permits being applied for in the last couple weeks, only about 26. Now, that's probably has to do with Thanksgiving holiday, although Wednesday was pretty busy. Also, several people have called me. 2 people called me today to ask what they could build inside the vegetative buffer. And I had to give them a math lesson on how to figure that out. And they didn't want to replant or do anything like that. So nothing came of it, but I just thought it was, appropriate and topical that people do ask this question on a pretty regular basis. I'm sure some of you on a regular basis get asked about the vegetative buffer as well. That's my staff update.
Thank you. Election of chairman to complete the 2017 year, which is tonight and next meeting.
That's correct, sir.
Okay, so, gonna open up the floor. Mr. Reed, you correct me if I'm wrong, or open up the floor for nominations to elect the chair for the remainder of the year.
That is correct. And it seems y'all have been fine with just going along as it is. 2 meetings, if someone just wants to nominate, you need to do it. So if someone wants to nominate you as chair, Mr. Pearson's the vice chair for the last 2 meetings, and just be done with it. And do it that way. Just do it as a,
I thought we did that. Did we do an interim or something?
Yeah.
he just automatically became the interim chair, and Mr. Pearson was nominated as interim vice chair. Short way to do it.
And the interim doesn't last through the remainder of the year?
You're
It's just a
supposed to
matter
have
of,
a chair. So he's the chair because he's the vice chair, just because, and that's really in an absence, guy doesn't show up for a meeting or 2 meetings, but you do not have somebody in that seat. So,
I was vice chair before David left, so then I became chair.
I was
Still
just thinking,
vice
I just
chair.
didn't realize there was
I thought
a time frame or a non-time frame to interim.
done.
as long as this discussion is taken, you could have voted for.
Let's do it.
I'd like to make a motion that Brad be officially the chairman and Mr. Pearson officially be the vice chairman for the remainder of the year.
Thank you, ma'am.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Gotta keep my pay raise. All right, discussion and review of comprehensive plan.
Oh, that's me. Okay, we were aiming to get 3 elements for you today, but we need to have further meetings regarding the economic development section, so we'll bring those to you and the remaining 3, so 4 altogether at the next meeting. What I have for you today is the community facilities and the housing elements. Community facilities is just what's out there, fire stations, hospitals, schools, what the average SAT score is, things of that nature. So if anybody found any interesting talking points in the community facilities point, we can talk about it, or I can just move on to the housing, it's up to you. So I can scroll through the pages of it.
Your discussion.
Okay. Well, we have mostly a volunteer firefighter force, so we really appreciate the people's time for volunteering to be firefighters in this county. Airport got extended. The Wilderness Camp School in Westminster is also a very good thing we have. I was hesitant to take anything out that wasn't distinctly in the way of putting new information in. So if you saw anything that was maybe old information, something that I wouldn't have, or the planning staff isn't necessarily from here historically, so if you saw something in there that's like, hey, that no longer exists and we didn't know about it, please let us know. The housing element is probably the most interesting of the elements to me. Just kind of shows the actual growth in the region. We've gone from 11 census tracts to 15 census tracts, and a census tract is how the government divides us up to count the populations. So this is the new census map. There was 4 more, they just subdivide. So you'll see some of the tracts have more people now and less people now because they've cut some imaginary lines. Let's see. So this is the percent change over time. So from 2000 to 2015, the cities have grown pretty much, except for Westminster, which is lost. And I'm assuming that's probably just due to mobile homes being moved out of the city of Westminster. That's kind of our educated guess on that one. The county, unincorporated areas of the county have grown 53% since 2000. It's an amazing change in number of housing units. To put that in comparison, it's also 30 times as much as the unincorporated areas, or the unincorporated areas have 30 times as much growth as the municipalities. And that's a piece of paper on your desk. I had to redo some math. Thank you, Mr. Gramley, for pointing that out. So that's just interesting how much we're growing. That's a hard number on where we're going. Housing occupancy is kind of lost a half a person over the county. This is a chart I put in here, and this says that half of all vacant housing in this county, stuff that's available for rent or for purchase, is second homes. So we have about 4,000 seasonal, it's 48% seasonal, recreational, or occasional use homes, which kind of speaks to tax base, to when we're planning for roads and, oh, look, we have all this growth and development, but how much of it is actually contributing to the area and growing the area on a person basis? So housing doesn't always represent population change. I left all this information here. This is how the census gauges how much you have to make in order to live. They use 30%. So if you shouldn't spend more than 30% of your income on housing. And that's the rule. That's how they justify what housing is affordable and not. And so that 30%, you have to make 11 grand to live in this county. So the cost is going up over time. Very low income and things of that nature. And this is the bottom of that. It kind of got a hanging pope on there. And I eliminated the 2009 to put 2015 in. Made more sense that way. This is all explanation on how that's come across. So I also put this on your desk too. In 2010, 2011, we kept records differently regarding building permits. For some reason, I don't know what. So that's why it goes from 2005, 2016, minus 10 and 11. Not sure why, but that's just the way the numbers are. And this just represents the number of building permits and things of that nature that really represent in the budgets and the money the fees paid in. So builders paid, in 2016, almost $500,000 in fees. And this is 2010 and 2011. That's just the way they ended up looking. Permits issued, 1,000. Some of these numbers feel, public inquiries, 1,000. That's a pretty round number, but that's the numbers we have. I would like your input on these. There's 3 charts here. These show other counties' income and permits in 2008 and 2009. Would there be any thoughts on maybe taking these 2 pages out? I don't see what they add to the end of the actual analysis. This is page 24 and 25. They don't really contribute to the analysis portion of this. They don't say, oh, okay, we know this information, therefore our goals regarding Oconee County are this. They seem to be interesting information for 2010. So I could go gather more information, but I haven't on these things. I could update these, but I don't personally see their value, but since you all have been here much longer than I have, maybe there is.
Is that in words in the rest of the document?
It's this stuff.
Yeah, okay. I mean, looks like they just had a math teacher that wanted to teach them to do graphs. So they made sure that they could say it in words and in graphs. Personally, I'd rather you take the words out, but.
I can take them both out. I just didn't see, and if there's we don't have to remove it, or we can leave it in there. It's fine. I
don't see anything.
not a lot to do with it. It looks like filler to me.
It's relevant.
Yeah, it doesn't feel real relevant.
Shorten it. I mean, shorten the book. We're going to redo it soon anyway. So
Correct.
throw it out. That'd be. Do you need a motion for that?
It is the comprehensive plan. Do I? Or no?
It's all gonna come back to you, cleaned up and ready for a resolution to send on to council, so. Analyze it when that resolution comes.
All right, so I'll pitch 24. I'll pitch those things. And that's pretty much the housing element in a nutshell.
I guess before we move on, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
To facilities, there is a reference to control-free district on PDF page 23, housing element 9 of 27. Really, that whole table hasn't been updated, and perhaps that's fine, but there has been the discussion on, all right, you're gonna put it in the use matrix, or we're gonna do something different with control free, how we look at it. We're gonna acknowledge it as a more than a quasi zoning district, something like that. This would be the time perhaps to think about and, put different wording in there if it is going to be changed. How it was looked at, as opposed to leaving it the same and then, a few months from now, turning it into general use and putting it in the zoning use matrix and going down that line of thinking. I'm not saying I should do anything right now. I'm saying that it pops up 2 times in the comprehensive plan, and we generally need to follow the comprehensive plan when you're doing subsequent, taking subsequent actions. So if we're gonna be thinking about tinkering with control free, we need to set the foundation here. There's a little bit more said about it in the land use element, which we haven't talked about yet, but.
Would we not do that when we actually review the upcoming one, where we actually
Well,
are
that's
setting the future goals
2.5
as opposed to?
years, yeah, or 2 years, right? 2 years.
Which it'll take us 2
2 years.
years to do it the way we're
From
going.
now. Well, if there's an intervening, it's not a full update, I understand, but it's a review, and you can tweak this language if you want to. I would feel comfortable if you put some thought into it at least, as opposed to leaving it as it is, and then someone says, let's put it in the zoning use matrix in 3 months or 6 months or whatever before that update's done, because then we could always go back to this and review it again, just this section, if that comes up. I'm just saying that.
Well, that sentence right there is wrong. I mean, technically,
We have that.
well, and we also, I mean, you can't put a sexually oriented business, a tattoo parlor. You can, but obviously, I mean, it says does not regulate use. And, I mean, there are some restrictions on it, so you need to be upfront about that.
In itself, it doesn't, and if you go to, this isn't in front of you now, but if you go to the land use element, it says, in brief, all parcels were initially placed in the control-free district, which, as the name indicates, imposes no use limitations on the parcel, but establishes the conditions necessary to overlay limited performance standards in certain areas. So that language covers where we are now. So I agree with you, it doesn't say it there, but taken together, it lets you know, yeah, the performance standards apply where they apply throughout the whole county, regardless of the district.
When this came up a few months ago, the control-free district, which personally, I think it should be on the zoning matrix, but there was an argument against it because it was more of a holding area. So is that thought process changing, or need to change, or should it change?
I don't have any recommendation or policy idea about that. I'm just saying, probably right now, it's just, hey, I just want to plug that into your minds to think about before we come back or before the resolution comes. If there is a move afoot, too, if there's more people who think like you, put it in the zoning use matrix, then probably this language needs to be tinkered with, tweaked a little bit to say what we're doing.
Because as of right now, we do have certain restrictions and setbacks in the control-free.
Yeah, I think it's good as it is now, but I think if you do anything more with control-free, you need to set the foundation with changing this language. And I know it's hard to predict what you're gonna do as a deliberative body in 3 months, or a year, but.
All right, so what you're saying in the land use section, it says what we do now.
Yes, ma'am.
Does it leave any leeway for it to be changed in the future?
I think that depends of course what the change is gonna be, but, I think that if the change has been the one that's generally been talked about, where we're gonna acknowledge it as a zoning district and put it in the use matrix, then I think we need to think about some different language. Just so everyone's clear, because it's really, and the name of it. It's a comprehensive plan, sets the foundation, we're supposed to track with it when you're developing your future ordinances.
Well, certainly with that sentence there, I mean, that is completely wrong. That single sentence, without the other sentence, that sentence is incorrect. Does the other sentence legally stop any changes being made to the,
As it's written, because it says imposes no use limitations on the parcel, not, one could certainly argue a setback is a use limitation, but so are kind of the boundary lines anyways, but, so if we're saying setbacks aren't use limitations, then we're good with that language. But if you're going to put it in the zoning use matrix, even if everything's a P permitted, you're still getting right near that line of a use limitation on the parcel, so that wording then, I think, would not be accurate in the land use section. That's,
So do we need to change this now or wait till we start the update?
for my money, I would just prefer y'all to think about what the vision is for the control-free district. Because we're not gonna have, we still have a couple more elements to get in front of you. Then it's gonna have to be like, all right, these are the minutes, this is what we agree the review is. Then we're gonna have a resolution that says this is what it is, and then it's gonna go to council as one bundle. And so we have a few steps to deliberate over what we're gonna think about the control-free district as far as setting that foundation. So at this point, it's probably not worth having a bunch of discussion over, but it's at least something, we've talked about it before, and we need to set this right.
Well, it was my understanding we were gonna try and complete this by the end of the next meeting with all the elements.
Yeah,
Is
as I understood it, we're gonna have the elements that they give, we'll just have 2 or 3 people.
Oh, we have 4 more.
4 more. So, yeah, I think this part of it, but then we still have, it'll all come back to you, and y'all need to say, all right, we've reviewed all of these elements, and this is our resolution. We reviewed every element, here council, this is the reviewed, and slightly updated, not the formal sense, comprehensive plan. So, it's not gonna get to council until the first meeting in January with council,
March,
it's
April,
a odd meeting, probably the first meeting in February, I'd say.
Yeah, but is that something like we could put an asterisk by it and then say, we've control-free district will be, more than likely be changing in, with an asterisk, here it is for now, but we see this changing in the future. But we don't know what the change is right now, but it will be probably
There's some
changing.
language like that, that's what I'm saying, like, put a placeholder in your mind right now about what that language might be.
Yeah.
And then we can discuss it before we send it on.
can I'm just gonna be honest, I'm not a lawyer by any means, so would it be within appropriateness to say, can you come back with some wording?
I'm glad to, but I'm
So
not-
that, just so that you leave it, for me, I would like to see it so that it legally allows us to change it if it needs to be changed, and then what in it that you change allows for what? Does that make sense?
I think it does. I can make it broad and ambiguous, that's what lawyers do, but I don't, but what I don't want to do is get into stepping into your area of making policy by drafting language. So if the notion is to.
That you would
to
just give
open
us the
door a little
opportunity
bit,
to.
Then yes, then I'm glad to
What
do
if
that.
some of us are against opening that door?
Then shut it. I'll just then I'll bring it.
I don't think, I mean, just my personal opinion, I don't want more regulations in control-free. I think that was the intention of it being control-free, to keep it as control-free as possible.
Yeah, and so that's why I think that's a debate that has to happen, probably gonna happen a few more times, but I'll just bring some language, maybe a couple options, and for the next time we meet, we can discuss it, go back to it, because it's gonna be with the land, section anyways.
And again, I don't think the intent is to add more regulations. It's just to clarify.
But if you open that door at just a tiny little crack, they're gonna slam it wide open.
Well, it's just to clarify, because it is a quasi zoning district, but yet it doesn't show up as one. And that leaves a lot of interpretation and questions open, so.
But as it stands now, we've got 2 different things. One says there's no restriction, one says basically they are, right?
Yeah.
This says there's no restrictions, no regulations, no nothing in it. This one little sentence is it, but the other one lets us know that there is things in it.
Well, the other one just references the performance standards, I think it'd probably be easy enough to reference the performance standards here, so they're in
At least
concert with
they're-
one another. I would say that that's a good thing to do. As far as going beyond that, I'll come up with some ideas. And
Okay.
decide what to do with that.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Root. All right, Mr. Chapman?
Are we moving on to the vegetative buffer, sir, or that, because that was the housing element,
Okay.
right?
Are
Are we
so
going
are
to?
you saying we're done with the,
Yeah, those are the two elements I had for you this evening,
Oh,
sir.
okay. Moving right along then, okay. Gonna open up discussion on the vegetative buffer. Mr. Smith has a short presentation.
I do, I hope.
What do you do? It'll be less than 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. My name is Mike Smith, and I come before you today as a private citizen. My purpose is to comment about silt fencing and as it relates to the vegetative buffer. But silt fencing cannot be commented on without including enforcement. The two topics are dovetailed and are intertwined. The whole issue of the vegetative buffer raises other issues that have been commented on earlier. Additionally, the letter that Ben made available to the members raises some challenging questions. The overarching theme of that letter is that Duke's SMG and the county's vegetative buffer ordinance should work in concert. I don't have the time to repeat what was said at the last meeting about the lake, other than to mention that the county collects about 45% of the total property tax revenue from the lake residents and Duke Energy, so protecting the lake is in the county's best interest. This first slide shows a silt fence that is close to failing. Next slide, please. Notice how much of this is supported by 4x4 wiring. It would have failed long ago if this wire had not been in place. Next picture. Under this brush, there is a lot of silt moving to the adjacent lot and towards this area in a great deal. You can blank it if you'd like. When I read the proposed Section 5, I felt that it needed more clarity, so I'm proposing a revised Section 5, which includes all of the original points I included, and as well as a sentence that prohibits the use of motorized vehicles in the vegetative buffer. I am running out of time, but the next 3 slides have my Section 5 and Section 6 revision. I hope you will take the time to read them at your pace during this meeting. Brad and I have talked about the word must and his concerns about its restrictive nature. I will let you members decide about its use and perhaps include David for advice and wordsmithing. Lastly, the issue of enforcement needs to be mentioned. If you don't have enforcement with consequences, there is very little incentive for a person to comply with an ordinance. So I'll ask these open questions. How long does it take to issue a stop order, and does it affect all activity on the site? What are the consequences if it is ignored? Next, if a lot is clear-cut, how do you determine the mature trees that are removed? If the issue goes to the magistrate court, they will surely ask this question. And lastly, what is the max fine that the court can levy? Who will be responsible from the county on the weekend if an incident occurs? In Section 6, I added a sentence in bold that addresses unstabilized soil. There was no guarantee or no guidance in this section before. Thank you for your time and attention. The last 3 slides have what I have written, but it was a long weekend.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, with that, we'll open up discussion. Adam, you want to get us rolling?
Sure. So I've been asked a few times, and once today I had to answer this question. And just as a brief, I'm sure everyone here knows it, but maybe people watching TV or maybe everyone's not clear. Duke's property line is 800 feet above sea level. It's not a linear measurement, it's a vertical measurement. So I just made these 2 little fun little graphics, boom and boom. That's Kiwi Valley with 800 feet, that's the design height of the, how come it didn't switch? Interesting. Interesting. All right, never mind. All right, and after the dam, the elevation of 800 feet is Duke's property line there. So I just wanted to show you all that this is what we're talking about here, this 25-foot, this is the 800, this is the 804, this is 825, it's supposed to be measured in a perpendicular line, and these are DHEC's various setbacks as well. I figured visualizing it may be a little easier for people to talk about, since we're talking about a land use thing. I realize the dock's egregiously large. The green spot here is really the view lane, that 15%, and adding in the proposed, if we go with it, this is the proposed 100 square foot, a 10 by 10, little pad here. And once again, this green spot is what we're talking about. This is our vegetative buffer in here. Everything else is DHEC's world. And then that's what a path would look like inside of here. That's a 5-foot path, 10 by 10 patio. And so this is kind of what we're talking about this evening. So I figured to visualize it may be helpful. To that end.
It is. And I guess just to further clarify what Adam's, if you can go back one, yeah. The 50 foot and the 75 foot, whatever the proper English is. That is as close as the septic lines can go to the lake. So before, if a lot was platted before 2008, septic lines can go 50 feet on up the property. After 2008, 75 feet. So the vegetative buffer, 25-foot vegetative buffer, there is some protection in there just because of the setback for septic lines. I guess have to keep that in mind. So, some of this is, not applicable in all. I mean, the vegetative buffer is there, but we can't go down to the lake and start our septic field right at the lake level. So we got to stay back 50 feet regardless, which is helping protect the 25-foot vegetative buffer. So I just want to kind of keep that in perspective as we're getting into that. And again, most of these communities are in HOAs and Duke also has a 50-foot buffer deeded into the property. Even property they've sold, it's in the deed that you cannot go down and take out trees larger than 6 inches in diameter. So there's some other protections in here just besides the vegetative buffer. Does that make sense to people that aren't familiar with the vegetative buffer? Okay.
A couple of other things while that slide is up. That 50-foot DHEC setback and the 75-foot DHEC setback, that is when the development was platted, not when somebody applies for a permit, just so that somebody knows. If the development was platted prior to 2008, then that sets you 50 foot back. A couple of other things to note on there real quick is it says the Duke Energy is an 804. In some parts of the lake, Duke Energy doesn't own to the 804. In some parts of the lake, Duke Energy owns to the 810. So that just being is sometimes the Duke Energy portion that they own goes well beyond the 25-foot vegetative buffer. I can give you an example right now where Duke Energy is the first 100 linear feet, which exceeds completely past the 25-foot vegetative buffer. So for us, and in their property, you can't do anything. If you start messing around in their stuff, good luck on getting a dock. Because as it was talked about, where's your baseline? Duke Energy has already videoed the entire shoreline of the lake. And when they go to set a dock in place, they want to see photos and they compare it to the original videos. And if something's changed, you don't get a dock permit. So we can't just arbitrarily start setting rules in place, especially if they trying to supersede some Duke Energy rule. And all of a sudden I say, sure, that's okay. You can cut down and, accept that 25-foot buffer. And then all of a sudden Duke actually owns, 60 or 70 feet up into the shore. We need to be aware of those things as well.
And for the most part, Duke owns, Full Pond is 800, Duke owns to the 804, or the property, Duke owns to the 804, so the property owner owns from the 804 on up the lot. So there's kind of a no man's land between the 800 and the 804, which Duke Energy controls. Now, those rules kind of change with the wind. We don't have any control over those as far as planning commission is concerned. Some years we're allowed in there, some years if a tree falls, we're not allowed to take it out of the lake, some years we can take the tree out of the lake. That's all Duke power. We don't have any control over that. So, but, so some of these things do fluctuate, but the 50-foot easement that basically Duke, is easement the right word? That Duke put in around the lake, and most of these subdivisions abide by, pretty much supersede the vegetative buffer. But I think going back to last month's or last week's or last meeting's conversation is, we're here to control, at this point in time, is to kind of resolve silt fence issues. And I think that's where we should be directed. And then, if we can get this resolved, get this out on the council, and then if we want to open this up next year for additional items, then we can come back and open it up for additional items. But I think we do need to address the silt fence and try and keep the conversation on silt fences, enforcement and penalties, and go from there.
No, I can't.
If,
With that, I'll open it up for discussion.
if we can't, control what happens on Duke Power's property, easement, whatever, first 50 feet, does that mean we have to require the silt fences to be, further inland than the 50 feet? Can we put silt fences on Duke Power's easement?
I'm not following the question.
It's a good question. Actually, let me see if I might be able to clarify. That 50 feet or that 75 feet isn't a Duke Power easement of property. It's a Duke Power required setback for septic system drain fields. And so that's their requirement in that 50 is regarding DHEC's drain fields.
With all due respect, I don't think that's entirely correct. Duke has a 50-foot easement for the most part. I'm not gonna say every part, but for the most part around the lake, that you can't go in there and cut trees larger. I mean, the 50-foot setback for DHEC is separate than the 50-foot easement from Duke.
True. Has nothing, to my knowledge, and I may be wrong, we maybe should get a Duke person in here, it has less to do about trees and more to do about vertical structures, though. And even then, not vertical structures, because vertical structures come in at the 25. I mean, in some subdivisions, Duke doesn't care, and in some subdivisions, they do.
There's some older subdivisions where the setbacks are 25 feet for Duke. Yeah, I will grant you that. But Duke has set certain easement, for the most part, it's 50 feet around the lake. There are some that are 25, but that has to do. Yeah, I mean, obviously, if the setback is 25 feet. At Kiwi Bay, obviously you can go in there and clear trees down to 25 feet. That's when we start getting into the vegetative buffer, or encroaching on a 25-foot buffer. But with the majority of this being 50 feet and the setback for septics being at 50 feet, we're protecting a buffer
Already.
So, to me, we need to kind of move the silt fences in order to protect the lake.
Okay. Where does the silt fence begin on this, just this example right here?
Sure.
If we were gonna build on that, where would the silt fence begin?
As per the current code, it's
Per the
25.
code we have.
Right here.
Right there on the 25-foot mark.
Yes, ma'am.
It wouldn't go down closer to the 804?
No, ma'am. No,
To
sir.
protect that? So in other words, everything can run through the vegetative buffer.
Well, that's the point
No,
of
that's
the
the point
buffer,
of
is,
silt fence.
that's why you have it. You have the buffer to stop stuff from running.
The silt fence goes up at that 25-foot line to protect the vegetative buffer.
Between the two properties.
But
It keeps this stuff from running from this property over to this one. But if it runs down through the
Well, it
vegetative
does.
barrier buffer and goes over on the man's property,
So for this particular instance, you'd put the silt fence here at 25, and Mr. Kisker, please correct me if I'm wrong, and then run a silt fence up the property line like a fence, as topography dictates.
or you wouldn't do a curve around to sort of try to keep it out of the vegetative barrier?
That's
Well,
Then
like
you'd
in
go all
front
the way
of
across
the
that 25
vegetative.
foot
line.
Just
Yeah.
come
No, he-
down and sort of,
that would take motorized equipment in there.
well, I mean, it's staying out of the buffer, but
But that's what I'm saying, I mean, in any Crescent subdivision, any lot in the reserve, any lot in the Springs, or any lot in any cliffs, the line is not 25 feet, it's 50 foot. I mean, I can't,
well,
and with all due respect to your
Yeah.
artwork, there's trees from 25 feet to 50 feet that we can't touch.
well, regardless if it's 50, 25, 75, or 10,000, I want to know where the silt fence has to start on any given property. I mean, an estimate, because it's not going to be the same spot on every property, but where it starts and it goes up above the construction or the movement of the dirt and all that crap. right?
Typically it would start at the limits of your clearing,
So,
which is gonna be typically the 50-foot line.
50 foot, okay. So anything that washes from the top straight down, there's nothing to stop it. It runs right into the lake, other than a vegetative
The
buffer.
silt fence goes there to stop
Fence
it.
goes there.
Silt fence will
You have
line
to put
the
one across
entire,
the back.
Yes.
along with it will be parallel to the lake. So it cannot come from the construction site. The silt fence is to stop it before it runs down to the
So it
lake.
basically goes from down the side, across the back, and back up the other side. Makes a U.
Depending on topography.
Depending on topography.
Well, that's what I'm talking about, but just for this particular example of land here, you would go down, across, and back up the other side to keep everything in that area. Okay, that's what I was wondering. And it usually starts around the 50,
50-foot buffer.
okay.
Okay, we require silt fence between properties, protecting against silt on the other property is,
No, we don't. I mean, that depends on topography. I mean, if a lot, again, we're getting into, I mean, there's no sense of if a lot is sloping this way, there's no sense of putting a silt fence up here.
right?
Down here, yes. Up here, no. So we shouldn't write an ordinance where you gotta put silt fence on all three sides. You know, it's just topography dictates where the silt fence goes.
But what I'm asking is, do we currently not only protect the lake, but we protect adjacent property?
Sure.
And DHEC does that, right? DHEC
No.
does
Over an
that.
acre.
No.
No. Typically,
DHEC did it on our property.
But
Well,
that's
it's-
poultry houses, I think it may be
Yeah.
different for residential, that's what
On
we were talking
poultry
about. a while
houses,
ago.
they'll tell you everywhere you got to have a silt fence.
Okay, is that
Let me ask a quick question. Do we have anything in the building ordinance that talks about silk fences in Westminster or Fairplay or somewhere other than the lake? Because one of the issues here is that dirt ran onto somebody else's property. Are people equally protected in other parts of the county from dirt running onto their property by silt fence under new construction?
I thought Mr. Markovich was about to have a fit.
Because my point being is that we're either protecting our residents or not protecting our residents as far as dirt running onto somebody else's property. If we're not protecting everybody, then this is simply a vegetative buffer issue, which is at the 25-foot, period.
So the silt fence silt barrier only occurs one more time, and it's in 26, which is roads and bridges.
But my understanding was that one, in this common law, so it would be a trespass and a nuisance for the bleed over into somebody else's lot, right? So that's just for me, I'm not a
Which is a
building code
municipal
person.
issue.
But as I understood the building code, and Mr. Markovich, y'all could speak to this, that you gotta protect the adjacent properties from your construction activities.
Anywhere
correct.
in the
Right?
county.
So that's That's why I thought it was.
And that's handled under what department is that described?
It's community development, which is Adam's full department, but it's on the building codes side, where he's on planning.
So not
He goes on
vegetative
either
buffer, it's
side.
covered already under a protection under building codes.
Well, the
Is that
vegetative
correct?
buffer is not specific. I guess.
No, I'm saying this silt fence issue protects all people in the county under a building code ordinance as to why you're putting it up, what it's for, and what it must be used for, and if that objective isn't met, then
We're dealing with the vegetative buffer. We're not, I think we need to stay on track or.
but you're asking that it go up into the 50, and the 50 is not the vegetative buffer. 25 is the vegetative buffer. So we're either dealing with the vegetative buffer, or we're dealing with something else entirely that needs to protect everybody in the county.
I'm just telling you where the silt fence normally goes because of the restrictions of the HOA, the Duke overlay, and, yeah, because of the HOA and the Duke overlay. And every job in a Crescent subdivision and most other ones, that silt fence is going on the 50-foot line. And very few, I mean, there are subdivisions where I built one, Kiwi Bay, where the setback is 25 feet. So we put the silt fence on the 25-foot setback. But if, Waterford Point is not gonna let me go down and clear cut down to the 25-foot buffer because of,
Because of Waterford Point, because.
no, because of the Duke easement to the 50-foot, saying you can't go in there and cut trees larger than 6 inches from 0 to 50 feet.
Does Duke Energy say that anywhere, or does Crescent say that?
It's in the deed of the property.
Correct, but that's a Crescent thing. It's not a Duke thing, and Crescent doesn't own 100% of the property. So we built 40 subdivisions around the lake, and we wrote the subdivision HOAs when we built the communities. And in those Crescent communities, you're absolutely correct. In a Crescent community, there is a 50-foot setback in the deed from Crescent when Crescent owned it. But Crescent didn't buy all the land around the lake. Some farmers didn't sell out, and in those cases, they owned to the 800.
Right.
So our vegetative buffer holds, but the 50-foot has no application.
Correct.
So we just need to, so as we're putting this in, we need to think of it in terms of not following suit with Duke necessarily, but following suit with whatever it is we say, as long as it doesn't step on Duke's toes.
Okay.
And basically what we need to do is simply put a silt fence across that straight line from point A to point B, so that whatever you do up at the top of the hill, mud does not run all the way into the lake water. Well, I
And
mean,
we need to
somebody
be able
else
to
will.
enforce it. That's the biggest problem,
And that-
is we have no teeth.
We have no teeth. And I have a question, and that is, okay, let's say, go to the next one, the one that has the trees. Okay. Let's say it's the Christmas holidays, and somebody has just, they inherited $1 million Thanksgiving, and over the Christmas holidays, they go up there and they take a bulldozer and a skid steer and a chainsaw, and they take out every single one of those trees, and take a skid steer and go everywhere, and then it rains. What does Duke Power do? Does Duke Power have any teeth?
Duke only controls this is my understanding, Duke controls from the 800 to the 804. They can go back in and make them plant trees and
But how do they make them? I mean, do
It's
they
either
have
dock
to?
permit or no dock permit.
they won't.
And that's
get-
it. So if he didn't even want to, I mean, I'm just saying,
So-
how are we going to have teeth if Duke Power
So
doesn't have
Duke
teeth?
Power's teeth are that if they own to the 804, or if they own to the 810, Duke Power's teeth are if they cut trees or do things in their zone without a permit from them to do so. That if they want to apply for a new dock, or they want to come in and make changes to their existing dock, they're gonna have to explain themselves as to what they took out and why without notifying Duke first, to my understanding. And it may be getting a Duke person in here to be more clarified, but I know that Duke in some cases doesn't have any authority beyond the 800. In some cases, they have authority to the 804, and in some cases, they have authority to the 810.
But in other words, if we pass a rule tonight, we have to back it up. I mean, that's it. Anything that we do, we have to back up, because Duke isn't going to.
That's correct.
Other than not giving them a dollar.
Other than their property value going from $300,000 to $50,000.
Yeah, and I understand that, I mean, to me, it is about silt fences, but it's only about the silt fences that go from point A to point B across that line of, and it doesn't matter if it's 804, 810, 825, 50, it doesn't matter how far above the water it is. That's the point at which you have to stop the runoff, right?
I would say that if we do anything, that be what it is that you keep the mud out of the buffer, whatever that buffer is.
So that's what we need to address, right?
Exactly.
If I may, it's been said several times, do you want me to find a Duke person to come in here, talk to Lakeshore Management person?
Please.
Because we can,
Well, we have a comment from a Duke person.
that's correct, and that's a kind of it's the first couple paragraphs of that. Also, I can speak to Ms. McPhail, like how they do it. So I got a complaint sent to me. A gentleman, he sent his sons down to cut a tree because he's putting a dock in. It was right on the edge of the lake. It was like in 802, and it dropped into the lake. The boys didn't know. The neighbor called me. I went down there, said, "Hey, how's it going?" And they waited for me because they knew I was coming. And I worked with Duke, and Duke made them plant 24 trees and bushes to replace one pine tree. And since they had to plant ours, Duke and the county worked together, and we got them to replant. It was 8 trees, 8 hardwood trees, 8 softwood trees, and 8 azaleas in that for one tree. So Duke does have the enforcement because they didn't have the dock, and they can revoke a dock permit as well.
No, and they don't revoke it. They just, it makes it harder to get it
Yeah.
without them saying you have to do some of these other things in addition, like you said.
Right. So
I've
one
seen
tree equals
somebody have to
24
do
trees.
$10,000 worth of trees in order to,
So what would you do?
What would I do?
Yeah, if it had been on the 50-foot setback.
Nothing, because that's outside of the 25. But if it had been inside the
Okay,
25-foot
well,
buffer.
okay, if it's wherever we set it, then what can you do?
So as it
What can the
reads,
county do?
as it reads right now, if there's 25, as per every 2,500 square feet of buffer that has to be established, there's a set of guidelines in there. It's actually, I still left those same. I haven't adjusted those at all. I believe it's 9 under vegetation. However, it could be clarified, that language, to say this is, it's kind of, you're hiding the football. We're kind of hiding the football in the language. So perhaps maybe we should just go through it kind of line for line at this point, if you like, or?
Let's do that. I will recognize Tom for 60 seconds. Or he throws a count.
Can you go back to that slide you just had up there?
Yes, sir.
All right. It doesn't matter exactly where that silt fence goes. We are bound by law to protect that buffer, period. That's it. If we set that, as long as, we're generally gonna put it where we disturb the soil. You're not worried about silt runoff below where you've disturbed. It's just not, could it happen? Yeah, I guess you could get a gusher and it might wipe out some of the leaf matter or something like that, possibly. But don't get hung up on the 25 feet, because let's say we're in a situation on Duke property that has the crescent covenant in it, and we're not gonna take that thing and weave it down the 25-foot line, but between trees. We're gonna go back to where we're gonna disturb, and we're gonna put it on the low line of the disturbance, period. And that's, so it's really just about that, and we don't need to get hung up in all this other.
that's a great point. Thank you.
All right, so let's put up 3811-1.
The blue is the proposed language. So, except for that part. So I just changed from A to the there. It just read better. We removed, so we changed this right here, the 800 feet above me at MSL and Kiwi, and 1100 feet Joe Cassie, just clarification, make people stop guessing. So that's really the big changes on.
Yeah, and that was done mainly, we had a bunch of language in there behind the seawall, middle of the seawall, and so we just took that to simplify where we're measuring from.
Yes, sir.
And just, it may be the obvious, but the only new language is the blue language.
Yes, sir, except for that caption thing right there, yes, sir. Speaking to motorized vehicles in there, Motorized equipment will not be permitted inside the vegetative buffer unless required to remove dead or dying trees, as confirmed by a certified arborist, forester, or the zoning administrator, or if required for remediation purposes as permitted by the zoning administrator. So that allows you to fix anything you messed up, take out trees that are dead or dying that may require equipment. It just doesn't allow you to, like, park a car down there.
Something, not to confuse it a little bit more, but I am. Should we add by the, or the HOA,
Or the HOA.
the homeowners association? If there's a dead or dying tree and the HOA has no issue with that coming out, should that involve you?
I don't believe the HOA, we don't
The
enforce
gov-
HOA's rules.
Huh?
We don't enforce homeowner associations rules.
That's right, I know. I mean, say if we're working on a lot and there's a dead tree in the buffer zone.
Sure.
And the HOA says you can go ahead and take that out, should you have to be notified for that? If the HOA is okay with that?
Well, the 25-foot vegetative buffer is the county's buffer, so by default, yes, the county may have the final say inside the 25-foot vegetative buffer. Now, if the HOA doesn't allow the removal of such things, that would be stricter than ours, and they would stop the homeowner for some reason if they wouldn't allow that, if they want deadfall.
And would you not, at some point in that same little blue section, want to add that? I mean, because I've seen people run a skid steer before that when they were done, they might have just taken out one tree, but they sure did a lot of damage and destruction at the same time. So if for damage, they had to go in there and fix that should they not, if they've damaged it getting that dead or dying tree, should they not also have to go in and repair and replant that?
I think that's covered later.
Okay, if it is,
But I guess what I'm saying is,
it just seems like they should,
if the
it's
HO
great that they can go in and fix it, but they need to make sure that it is doing its job when they leave.
Yeah. I guess what I'm saying is if it's okay by the homeowners association, do you need to be involved? And your answer is yes.
Because it's our 25-foot buffer. It's not the homeowner association's 25-foot buffer. So if we allow them to say what can and cannot be planted, at that point, then we're just kind of ceding. And if that's the way we want to go, if we want to kind of allow the HOAs, if there are HOAs, to take over.
You don't have uniformity if you have the HOAs setting it. You don't have uniformity around the entire lake.
That's correct.
Okay, move on.
Silt fences, everyone's favorite topic. Oh, I'm sorry, 4 is the grandfathering clause. All structures and landscaping existing at the time shall be considered as permitted and shall not be considered impediments to the buffer. That's already exists in there. It's just kind of all mashed together with other stuff. All right, silt fences. In order to ensure that the natural vegetative buffer is maintained during the development of property, properly installed and maintained silt fences are required before a zoning inspection will take place, period. Zoning inspections take place with footing inspections. That's when you dig it out and pour the foundation. So we'll go out right when that footing inspection is to make sure that the setbacks are being met as well as there's a proper silt fence up. So we need them to be up before we get down there because people have called us before for a zoning inspection and hey, where's your silt fence? Oh, well, we're getting it. Well, you failed the zoning inspection, now I have to come back there. And as you know, this county can be kind of a hike to drive around. The silt fences must begin at or above the vegetative buffer line. So I believe that speaks to Mr. Pearson's comments earlier. So it can start at 25 if maybe it's a smaller lot, a flatter lot, a lot that topography dictates that it starts there, but also be set up higher, such as at the 50. So right now it says you have to start at 25. So if you don't start at 25, it's a fail. So this allows the builders to adjust for each lot, because each lot really is unique in this county as far as topography goes. Wire-backed silt fences are highly recommended, and J-hooks, hay bales, grass mats, and seating shall be installed as needed, at least 25 feet from full pond contour, separating the buffer from the developed area until the completion of construction. J-hooks are like little chunks of silt fence that's kind of sit independent. They're not like a linear setup. That's just a builder's terminology.
Just to be clear, just so that everybody sees this, there's actually a conflict here where it says 25 feet from full pond, that you just read, with item 2 that talks about 25 feet can be from the riprap, which I think the can be from the riprap should be taken out, because I think it all should be 25 foot from the 800 contour.
So in the blue version, it says, and this is 2 under natural vegetation.
You got an older version.
Oh, do I? Okay,
Yeah.
so 2 now does say.
Yes, sir,
from the
this is it
800?
right here. It says shoreline
Okay.
stabilization shall be permitted, blah, 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 blah. But it says it will start at full pond contour at 800.
Okay, good.
Yes, sir. Sorry about that, if I gave you the wrong copy. So this speaks to silt fencing and kind of puts, builders, developers, owner builders on notice that you got some silt fence work to do. The county may mandate additions of any of these options at any point during construction. So we took out zoning administrator, we kind of allowed it to be the county may mandate additions. So the impetus of this whole conversation, so had the county gone out at the point of where silt may have been pouring out, we could have said, hey, you have to put up silt fence, yeah, he knows that, but also you have to do X, Y, and Z as well. And this would allow us the ability to say, hey, do this, instead of him just saying, no, I put up silt fence, I'm good.
Do you, with whoever's thing about the wire,
Wire
behind
back.
the silt fence?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you think that should be mandatory?
It depends on the lot. I was initially all for it. It's the most extreme measure you could for silt fences, and a lot of lots around the lake are quite vertical. They're a hike to walk up and down, but not all of them are. And those wire back silt fences are very good for as we saw in the picture, they will hold some silt. But say for up and down the sides, like that's just a lot of sheet flow versus a lot of kind of loading flow. And it would definitely be beneficial. Would it be more beneficial than a silt fence? I'm not a builder, I really couldn't speak to that, but I don't think it's necessary in every instance. And I believe it's more, there's initial cost for that wire back. I'm not 100% certain, but I believe there is.
So but that sentence takes care of that. If you go out there and you see that it's a really steep lot, and you're concerned, you can say, well, I like your silt fences, but I want wire right there,
Yes, ma'am.
before they can go any further. Okay.
So this is actually should be blue here, I apologize. So this is new link sheet. If the silt fences and other measures listed above fail to prevent an accumulation of silt and other debris in the natural vegetative buffer, the county shall require the responsible parties to install additional control measures. These measures shall be installed in a timely manner to prevent any further accumulation.
And the only way to know if they fail is if somebody calls and says, kind of reports it.
Yes, sir.
So
If they don't,
periodic, you don't go back out there to look at it again, right?
that's correct.
When they go out for subsequent inspections, do they re-inspect that to make sure that it's holding?
Not if it wasn't a silt fence, no ma'am. They're usually going out for, they go out for footing, then they go out for, let's say plumbing rough-in, they go out for framing rough-in. They're inside the envelope of the building. They're not going out and looking around each site.
Should that be included? Should there be a kind of final walkthrough to see if everything's held up? And
There could be, so it'd be additional inspection at the close of business, before the certificate of occupancy? Is that kind of where you're going with that?
yeah, I'm just thinking, we've got, all these issues where, it's gonna have to be removed, but the only way we would know that it was there is if somebody, outside called and said
Correct.
there was an issue.
Correct. Neighbors are the number one
Okay.
people.
How often do you have problems with silt fences?
Well, over the summertime, well, it's seasonal, so over the summertime and post that whole slew of storms, bookended by Irma on one end and whatever the other storm was, I got quite a few phone calls. I had because silt fences are a time-dependent thing, like if there's stuff leaking in the lake and whatnot, I can't say, okay, well, I'll get to it in a Friday from now. So those are kind of times when I go out there, but I have the code to several of the gated communities around here, because I've been there enough times for silt fences. So it happens.
Would you have like 10 calls a season or 100 calls a season? Or-
I don't have exact numbers, but it's probably closer to 10 than 100. And then there's definitely times people call about silt fences and it's not an issue as well. They just neighborly stuff.
I'd like to defer to Brad, before we start talking about penalizing, we've talked about penalizing and fees and things like that. I can't imagine penalizing a homeowner or a builder in the event of a monsoon, and that's what it sounds like when you get calls, is when there's some crazy rainstorm that is out of anybody's control, that we'd be penalizing for that. I could see us potentially having that inspector, as he inspects other stuff, inspect that. But I'd like to defer to a builder to that. How does that get watched?
I think that's addressed down in E, isn't that, Adam?
There's a violations penalty. So the way I've done it is we always give people time to fix it. You just don't go out there with the hammer on the first day, be like, I'm pulling here's a $500 fine every day and things of that nature. No, every silt fence issue that I've run across so far, with the exception of the impetus for this thing, the builder's been on it within a day and a half, 2 days. Like, hey, Mr. Gisker, he wasn't one, but just for reference here. Mr. Gisker, you had a silt fence blowout. Oh, okay, I'll take care of it. And I mean, it's 48 hours usually, it's pretty quick.
I mean, 9 times out of 10, it's gonna be the neighbor calling the builder, gonna be the HOA calling the builder to resolve the silt fence issue even before you get the call. So, I mean, I live it every day, and, you know.
I had one homeowner calling himself. He called about the builder not having the silt fence up on his own house.
View lanes, moving on.
Yeah.
I just don't see this as a vegetative buffer issue, as long as the vegetative buffer isn't affected by the build.
Well, we're protecting silt from getting into the vegetative buffer
Because of the build,
because of the build.
affected by the.
Potential build, I mean.
Or the clearing of land.
And that's, we're not differentiating between developed and undeveloped property. If somebody's gotta go down there and maintain their property, that they're not building a house. Say you buy a lot, you're not building for 5 years, but you wanna go down there and clean up and blah, blah, blah. You may or may not have to put up a silt fence, but it doesn't differentiate between that and here.
That's correct.
What it also doesn't talk about, though, is the guy who goes and mows his yard, he doesn't have to put up a silt fence to keep the grass clippings out of my lot. I mean, we're talking about this because it's a build.
That's correct.
So we
But-
really should go back to building.
Okay. View lanes.
View lanes. All right, so there's, the last paragraph here is silt that has entered the natural vegetative buffer shall be removed if possible, and then the area with the natural vegetative shall be stabilized with pine straw, mulch, or other planted vegetation. See section E for penalties, we'll get to E at the bottom. All right, view lanes. View lanes already existed in the definitions. However, I just moved it into the only section that's applicable to, just for clarity. That way when people read it. I've also added one word, it's observation and access. Because right now, the view lanes, as it reads, is just for view. It's not meant for cutting a path in. So we've clarified that. Also, the view lane may be up to 15% of the vegetative buffer as one contiguous lane or multiple smaller lanes. So if there's a large enough linear section of lakefront you have, you can chop it up into various pieces without being penalized. Perhaps you have reasons for that. Any questions on that one? Allow development. Right now, you can develop inside the vegetative buffer, provided it's less than 15% of your, less than 20% of your 15% of your 25-foot times the linear motion. This is the algebra I had to do today. And then you have to replace it by planting elsewhere in the vegetative buffer. So we just kind of clarified this. Allow development within vegetative buffer. Paths of permeable or impermeable construction are permitted within the natural vegetative buffer, provided they are no wider than 6 feet. Permeable or impermeable, be concrete or not, we have an aging population, and allowing people to get down to the dock via a paved path is probably a good thing. Turnarounds are permitted within the 15% view lane. This was brought up at the last meeting. It's about turnarounds. Any path is considered a part of the allowed 15% view lane. Patios and decks without permanent vertical features other than those required for safety or building code standards are permitted but may not be more than 100 square feet and must be part of a contiguous 15% view lane. 100 square feet is what crescent communities allow, as they make up a large portion of the lake. There's no reason for us to have a conflicting or different kind of standard, I believe. And vertical features, that means no roofs. So you can have a patio, you can have your 10 by 10 deck, whatever, but you can't build a house down there, a mother-in-law suite or what have you. Electric and water lines may be installed through the natural vegetative buffer provided they run within the permitted 15% view lane and meet all applicable building codes. Now, as been said, you can't run it below the 804 onto Duke's property or 810. You can run it within your property. So if you want a spigot, if you want to, for some reason you don't want to use the solar lights, you want to use powered stuff, you could.
Let me interject.
Yes, sir.
In keeping with the view lanes and paths, view lanes are not in, again, and I keep bringing up Crescent, but that's, view lanes are not in Crescent's covenants, so that's really a mute issue. When I go for an approval in a Crescent community, I can't clear cut, my view lane in a Crescent community. So really, this is overprotection here for areas that aren't covered under Crescent. They do allow path down to the lake, but you can only take it to the non-permeable, you can only take it to the 804. From the 804 to the 800, it has to be permeable, but that doesn't have anything to do with the county.
Correct.
That's Duke. So that's why that's not in here.
Yes, sir.
So again, just further clarifying.
Vegetation removal. No trees larger than 6 inch caliper at 4 feet from the ground shall be removed unless certified to be a hazard by a registered forester or arborist. Trees may be limbed up to 15% of their height. A removal plan shall be submitted for approval. Invasive species may be removed in such a manner that does minimal damage to surrounding native vegetation. Trees that are clearly dead or dying may be removed with the permission of the zoning administrator. Existing vegetation outside the 15% view line may be underbrushed. This underbrushing may not utilize herbicides, fertilizers, or other chemicals and may not increase runoff throughout the natural vegetative buffer, period. Those sentences, anybody have thoughts on those? Because those seem to be the touchy ones last time. Okay, great. The vegetation within the allowed 15% view lane may be maintained to the property owner standards, provided it does not create or contribute to runoff entering the lake or adjacent properties, and the maintenance does not utilize herbicides, fertilizers, or other chemicals. So that addresses our vegetation for the most part. And then vegetation mitigation. The following mixture of plants for every 2,500 square feet of the natural vegetative buffer shall be required if reestablishing native vegetation or for mitigation purposes. So this is twofold. One, if you buy a piece of property that was already clear cut years ago or sooner, and you want to plant, this gives you a planting schedule. If you clear cut tomorrow, I'm going to go out there on Wednesday and say, here's your planting schedule for every 2,500 square feet of a vegetative buffer you have to replant. And as was mentioned, I believe, the last meeting, people have paid dearly for cutting into the vegetative buffer other times. And the one gentleman had to replace 24 trees. I don't know how much an azalea and a hardwood tree are, but I mean, I'm sure he spent some money replacing 24 trees for one lousy pine tree, plus he had to rent a skid steer or a barge to pull it out. And then the rest of the language, with the exception of the typo that's existing in the code right now, has been changed through 10 and 11. Is there any questions with 10 or 11 there?
So if you have to go out there and tell them this is what you have to plant, do you shut them down until they do that, or?
I haven't had that opportunity. The one time we have gone out there for the one tree, the gentleman was right on it. He wasn't planning on building, and I did talk with, Scott Carroll as our interim director of community development, and we just put a little mark on the property. We can, because we use a citizen serve problem, and we're not gonna allow any building permits to be planted further building permits until he does the planting. And he did it within few weeks of that. So we can remove building permits for those things. So it depends on the individual. Some people are like, oh man, I didn't know this. Well, all right, I'm going to Home Depot. And some people may not be like that.
But you have a way to make sure that it's done.
Yes, ma'am.
Next section will be E, penalties,
Sorry.
which says imprisonment.
Exactly, it does.
I have to come up and sit through planning commission meetings.
All right, so we put a little softener on the penalties. The intent of the natural vegetative buffer is to protect the natural and built environment within and surrounding Lake Kiwi and Jocassee. All parties owning, renting, or inhabiting property or working on property within the lake overlay are required to work within the intent and the letter of this and all applicable ordinances and standards to protect and enhance the natural and built environments, period. A violation of this article is punishable by a fine and/or imprisonment in an amount not to exceed the jurisdictional limits granted to a magistrate's court in Oconee County under South Carolina law. Additionally, building and zoning permits may be revoked, stop work orders issued, and civil fines levied as appropriate under the circumstances. Further, the provisions including prescriptions, proscriptions, and penalties contained within the International Property Maintenance Code may apply.
That's where I'd like to get the opinion from Mr. Root. That is applicable in this instance.
The National Property Maintenance Code,
Yes.
that is in there, in my mind, mainly because of the erosion section that's within there. It's not, would not be the first look, but it is a look, and it is a section, a code section that's within the state code that allows for civil penalties, which are a little bit easier perhaps to administer. And so, if you have erosion, it's not perhaps a new or ongoing construction where you can pull a building permit or a zoning permit and that's a building permit. This language is in there to give notice that the IPMC could apply. I disagree with Mr. Markovich that it's as small as the eye of a needle, but it's not gonna apply ubiquitously. I agree with that much, but it is in there and it is an avenue that could be pursued under. Going back to Mr. Smith's questions, magistrate, he's very unlikely he's gonna put anybody in jail for a zoning title violation, but it's there. He has 30 days that he could confine somebody. Again, unlikely. The monetary limit is $500. Again, these are the criminal sanctions. For violation of a building code, a building permit that falls within the building code, you can have a civil fine, which is $200. Then they're supposed to give a plan on how they're gonna rectify, fix the problem they've created. If they don't do that within 7 days, then you could have fines up to $2,000 each day being counted as a violation. I don't see that ever happening. I don't think that ever has happened, but that is another enforcement mechanism. In addition to, of course, you pull someone's permit, they're gonna have to get a new permit. That's pretty costly as well. I think stop work orders, Mr. Smith also put up those, I would hope would be issued, immediately as appropriate under circumstances, depending on the compliance of the offender.
Under silt fences, I wouldn't be, or in talking to a couple different people, the word entrenched silt fences, meaning basically properly installed. If you just go out there and stick a silt fence on top of the ground, it's not gonna solve anything. When you dig in the silt fence, put it in, cover it up, that's what holds them. I mean, that's what holds the silt. So if there's no objections, I would like to put entrenched silt fence under the paragraph 5.
Chairman?
Yes.
Okay, just because of the issues that have been brought up with Duke requirements, HOA requirements that may be more strict, than we have here, the applicability of what we have here to Duke, and how it's it's not a moving target, but how it may apply differently. I wrote a section and sent it to by email to Adam, that I think would be good to either add as a new E and then drop down penalties, or just add at the end, that states compliance with the requirements of this section does not nullify a party's duty to comply with other or more stringent regulations, requirements, or guidelines of a Duke Energy company or affiliate, or any local, state, or federal law or other applicable authority. So it just gives notice and extra notice. I mean, that's the law, but it gives notice to, all right, guys, just because we say you can do this, that you have to do this, Duke may have something that's more strict. And I think that's not necessarily an issue, but it gives, here's a red flag or a yellow flag, whatever, for you to be mindful that this is not the end game, perhaps. Is that good, Adam?
Is everybody good with that?
I think that should be
wordage?
great wording to be added.
All right.
And I like the word entrenched as well.
Okay. I'm gonna, I don't know if I have the power, Mr. Root, but, since this has been very contentious, or a lot of interest shown in this, I like input from the gallery, for lack of a better term. So if anybody wants to speak for 30 seconds, speak now or forever hold their peace. But 30 seconds. 30 seconds.
Thank you. One, I think in that very first part where you say no motorized vehicles in the buffer, you need to say except in the view lanes, okay? Because there's unquestionably the view lanes, you point out that you can do these different things in the view lanes, but the view lanes are in the buffer, unquestionably. So you need to put an exception in there. Two, generally, this is all thought about as being construction related from the building of a dwelling or some sort of thing. Builders like me do absolutely no landscaping, and we don't put it in our contracts to refuse to. Landscaping comes in after I'm done. I will not allow a landscaper on my jobs while I'm there. When I leave, I take my silt fence with me, period. What happens, the landscaper comes in behind, you don't have a permit for a landscaper. How are you going to trigger any of this? So, assuming that all this stuff just takes place only with the contractor is a false assumption, because there is so much that goes on afterwards. 3, as far as going down and running water and electric, we go way beyond 804. We go all the way down on the docks. And 2, when we put in water source heat pumps, we go all the way into the lake. I put tractors in the lake. Now, I have to get a special navigable waters construction permit to do it, but we get that permit and we put the tractor in the water, we do what we have to do. So there are plenty of times when we're going to have motorized vehicles down below there.
Good point.
I think you ought to require 4x4
State your
wire
name.
back.
State your name for the record.
Mike Smith, S-M-I-T-H. I think you ought to require 4x4 backing for silt fencing. I think it's really pretty standard now. This is not a cost problem. People that are building houses on that lake can well bear the extra cost if there is significant cost for 4x4 fencing. As Tom said about the landscaping, once the contractor is done and he pulls up his silt fencing, that back area generally is bare. So I had suggested in my draft that area behind the house, that silt fencing stay in place until the landscaping is completed. You're just adding the potential for more runoff. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
We've left out a major lake. I'm Jerry Barnett, by the way, for those of you that don't know me. Lake Hartwell, managed by the Corps of Engineers. I served in the Corps of Engineers. For a short time, I worked for the Corps of Engineers. All the regulations are etched in stone. They do not play games or make exceptions for anybody. And I think you need to have a look at the way Lake Hartwell is managed, the shoreline of Lake Hartwell, before you get too deep into trying to satisfy a few special interest groups around a given lake. That's all I've got to say. Because it's pretty obvious what's going on.
Mr. Cotter?
Thank you.
All right. Okay, any other comments?
Clarify for me, is this vegetative buffer only for Kiwi and Jocassee? It's got nothing to do with any other lake in the county?
That's correct, sir. The Army Corps of Engineers owns Hartwell, and just like Duke owns, we work with Duke, so that's why we have that. Army Corps, as was just stated,
And the smaller lakes around the county that aren't power company lakes?
like Crystal and all this stuff, we don't have any, right.
I mean, it's specified.
Those are private, I believe, some of them, not all,
Okay.
but some are private lakes. Are there private lakes?
There are some private and there are also some conservation.
All right, conservation land. So yes, sir, this is strictly applicable to Kiwi, Jocassee.
All right, so per the draft we received in our packet, we've added the word entrenched silt fences and an idea in my mind for, exception, motorized equipment, exception in the view lanes. Does anybody have issue with that?
You're saying put an exception in there, take motorized out, what was your?
Except for in the view lanes.
Okay,
I mean, in
except for
order
the
to
view lanes.
create, you're gonna need equipment to create your view lane. I think that does make sense to me. Comments?
So if I may, so motorized equipment, so this language, motorized equipment allowed for the creation of the view lane?
I think just in the view lane, right?
I would say motorized equipment will not be permitted inside the vegetative buffer, with exception for the creation of the view lane, or, with exception for use in creating the view lane.
Or wouldn't you even have a golf cart going through the view lane?
That's on your path that you're allowed, your 6-foot path.
Motorized, they recommend, just clarification.
Are we disallowing, people to be able to launch their own boat in their own backyard?
Boat ramps aren't something I've,
Boat ramps are not permitted.
there are a few, I think, are there not?
There's a few private ones from way back when, but I don't think, as far as I know, you can't permit a new boat ramp.
Instead of saying in creation of the path, just, have it, no motorized vehicles are allowed in the vegetative buffer area except for the path. Because there will be at times golf carts that are just going from point A to point B and not, if we don't specify it that way, then they won't be able to do that. They'll just be able to make their path and that's it, so.
Yeah.
And then I have a question.
I'm gonna let you and Mr. Reed word that. Or if you all come up with something real quick that.
Only American vehicles allowed inside the vegetative buffer.
Yeah, I mean, you know where the commas go.
Yes, sir.
Parentheses, hyperboles. I think that's a good point. As far as Tom's permit or point to, people are putting geotherm in, Duke issues that permit, and to me, taking, the trencher through to put the thing, that would be assumed, I guess, in that.
What
So
about the landscaping? I mean, does this apply until it stops being a problem?
I'm sorry, what was your?
Okay. Mr. Markovich said that as soon as he finishes building, he walks out with his silt fence.
Mm-hmm.
So then does this rule kick back in for the landowner until he landscapes it so that silt is not a problem?
This would actually all go to the property owner to start with. I wouldn't write necessarily.
But I
would
mean, in other
contract.
words, they have to be aware of the fact that as soon as Mr. Markovich leaves at least, they've got to have landscaping in place to stop any silt.
Through the development of the property.
Yeah, okay.
For the record, I leave my silt fence and make the landscaper clean it up, because I'm not gonna reuse it. So, the landscaper takes it out as he's mulching and grading and, you know. Tom's got like 500 feet in the back of his truck if anybody needs it.
I would like to bring up one other point. It's probably a contentious point. While we are making some wonderful changes to this, I think it should be considered. And that is that one, this is applying just to Kiowee and Jocassee, and it's not applying to other places. So in other words, we already have placed certain rules on certain residents that aren't applicable to other residents. This form says is that these standards apply 750 feet from Full Pond. We're talking a couple of Walmart parking lots. And I counted the other day somewhere in the neighborhood of 75 farms that are inside of this 75 foot. And while I think it's very applicable that we have certain standards if we're building a subdivision, there are many properties out there that you would never consider being a lakefront property, but they're touching this 750 foot area. Now, while right now today, this doesn't really have a real impact on those people. But at some point in time, some planning commission up here is going to get up here, and who knows what kind of restrictions they start placing on these people. Heck, we have a Dollar General that's inside this 750 foot. Nobody complained about that today. Well, actually, they did complain about it. There was a lawsuit about it. But we got it approved for some reason. We just went on and said, oh, well, never mind on you. Are we going to have to say never mind on these farmers as we come down the road? I think we should be reducing this from 750 to something more like 500, which is really where the subdivisions are applicable, and not affecting all of these farmers that are just happen to come up in this be 750 feet.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but, I mean, the title of this thing is Lake Overlay District, which is 750 feet. The vegetative buffer falls in that 750 feet. Any development, subdivision development, that's not touching a lake or that's closer than that, that's gonna be more than an acre or 2 acres, and then DHEC comes in, and that's where silt fencing and.
Right, but we're revamping the entire lake overlay, and this is the first paragraph of the lake overlay, is we're affecting people that have nothing to do with the lake, with this 750 feet.
That's always been there, that's not.
It's actually not always been there. We put it in there a few years back.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm saying that's not part of this.
Right, we've only looked at from
Yeah.
vegetative buffer down.
Yeah.
We haven't
touched
touched
the lake overlay.
Other than 1.5 there,
It just says natural
but
vegetative buffer.
one, under that category, we've actually dealt with. And I'm just saying that in that category, we're dealing in that category. Why are we not dealing with people who have no impact? And yet we are impacting them when we put a Dollar General in there. Why is that number 750? When it affects so many people that aren't around the lake. Because what people need to remember is that if a creek goes up a mile away from what we consider Lake Kiowee, if that creek is in that 800 foot, everything 750 feet away from that creek is in this overlay. It's not just people that get to see Kiowee.
All right, Mike, you asked for it. Mr. Codner.
That's 750 feet. This is Jim Codner again. 750 feet was established way back when the ZEO was put in. The original proposal was a 1/4 mile, and it was a huge political issue. I mean, if you want to go messing with that, there'll be a lot of people in here. 750 feet was a compromised position put in. It really does serve the lake well. There may be farmers that are within the 750 feet, but still, as that land is developed, the 750 feet ought to apply.
For development is where is what I'd mentioned in there. Yes, it would apply to subdivisions and developments, but should it apply to farmers?
I can't agree at all that you ought to be changing the 750. That would not be appropriate. And,
So
I don't think there's any, I don't know of any issue,
I
any issue with a farmer who happens to have land within the 750 where he's got a problem.
Right now,
Has that ever
today.
come up? Well, okay, I mean,
Right
it
now,
hasn't
today,
come
he
up in the
does.
past 10 years.
So, but as we make changes in the planning commission, we are affecting, future planning commissions could affect a lot of people who have big properties that have nothing to do with the lake.
Let's worry about that when the future planning commissions are there.
Yeah, that's our problem.
So it's just a point to bring up.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I think the only thing it affects right now, within that 750 feet, is no single-family, multifamily development shall have the density, no structure above 65 feet, and the commercial requires special exception, right? So, I mean, that's the only thing that.
Today, that's the only thing that would be prohibitive or dealt with
I mean,
in here. Unless somebody comes in and makes new rules.
Yeah.
Or
I mean,
more
that's-
rules.
That's the concern, but I don't know that we can necessarily anticipate new rules until they're presented. I think that's a hard thing to do.
Okay. All right, proper term, I'm gonna call a question and cease this. Can I do that?
The chair can't really under
All right,
the Robert's rules. We don't even have a motion on the floor yet, but
well, I was gonna try and end discussion.
yeah, if two-thirds of y'all said, if 5 of y'all say, let's put this to a vote, and
Can we make a motion to make these changes that have been discussed?
we've got the changes, adding in the jive language with the other stuff that I've read out. Y'all want us to take this straight to council, or do you want us to bring it back here for
See
your
the
final
final
check off?
product.
I'd like to see cleaned up, possible.
I mean, I'd feel more comfortable if you saw the final version.
Okay.
The only difference is what you read
My
out.
addition,
And
entrenched,
entrenched.
we're gonna
Motorized.
tweak the motorized language.
How crucial is it that this get to council quickly?
We
haven't
were
worked on it
told
in
to
like
fix the
3 months.
problem. My goal was to get it fixed before the end of the year.
So if
I
we
mean,
bring it back next time, then would there be a chance for council to get it before the end of the year, or?
They'd get it first.
They get 1st of January though.
If our county attorney recommends that we clean it up and look at it one last time.
I go with y'all on that. I say I feel comfortable because I'm a worrier.
Okay. All right.
Orders and what I do, but,
So, do we need a motion to add these things?
if it's coming back to y'all, you do not need a motion. If
Okay.
you want us to take it straight to council, then you'll need a motion to, as stated, with the changes, including the entrenchment, language regarding motorized vehicles being allowed during construction and thereafter, as we understand that, golf cart issue, and then my language for the compliance with other authorities.
Okay. Is everybody good with that?
So bring it back.
I'm ready to go with it.
I can't, I'm not telling anyone not to make a motion, so.
I agree. So just go ahead, clean it up and send it.
Well, no.
So,
Is that a motion?
Wait a minute now.
Is that
That's,
what you're
that's two
requiring?
different animals. It's either,
Yeah.
we need a motion,
I make a motion that we clean it up, send it on.
And clarify that motion, the cleanup is to add entrenched, I don't know what that was, add my language, for the penalty section that I read off regarding, compliance with other authorities. Tweak the language regarding motorized vehicles, within the view lane to allow, not only during construction, but thereafter, correct?
So you're gonna let a skid steer into that view lane after? I mean, that's what it says right now. If we send it on as it is, it allows a skid steer in that view
what if they
lane.
have to get a trencher in there to work on the pump system or something like that?
We can't micromanage it.
That way, if they do tear it up, they're gonna have to fix it anyway. And it's in the view lane, not in
Well,
the, not in the, general area of the zone anyway. They would have to fix their own path if they mess it up.
Well, I mean, the motorized equipment for the creation, or
Yeah, to me, a
for
golf-
lack of a better term, the creation of the view lane, I can understand that, but if we're creating a path down there, pretty much assume somebody's gonna drive a golf cart down there, so I don't know,
But is a golf
do we
cart-
need to complicate that by adding golf carts?
It couldn't hurt to clarify, because right now the big issue with the vegetative buffer, why we kind of took it from looking just at silt fences to looking at all of it, is because there was a lack of clarity in this. So I'm all about adding as much, I don't want anyone to have to guess. If somebody could read this without ever talking to me, that'd be great. So I think if us saying, somebody has to ask, well, can I drive my cart down there, because it does have a motor in it? What do I say? Yes, you can, or no, you can't.
But then the sentence, once the view lane is established, then only thereafter can golf carts or, you know, I mean, here we go again, but, you know, once you establish a view lane, you put your path in, then only you can take, you can't take skid steer down, you know, you can't take a skid steer down there.
Okay.
Golf carts are like transportation.
Golf cart,
motorized
there you go.
equipment.
Golf cart or like
Right,
transportation.
Are there ever a weight limit? I mean, because do you want to drive a van down there? I mean,
Well, that, I believe that was.
If you can get on a 6-foot path,
Are we disallowing lawnmowers and weed eaters?
Yes.
That has not been, we have not talked about that, that is in,
It says that you can underbrush and stuff, well, are you gonna pull it all by hand, or are you gonna use a
Can't,
motorized?
but it also says you can't mow it.
so at the
If you're gonna
moment,
mow it, you might as well not even have it.
if I may, so right now, there are existing lawns that came in before this ordinance, as well as lawns I imagine that came in after this ordinance, and there are lawns that are being mowed, that is correct.
okay. So as the motion
Period.
stands, please
Motion
review.
made by Ms. Lyles is adding entrenched, adding language regarding compliance with the other authorities, motorized equipment, allowed during construction or development of the view lane, motorized equipment, i.e. golf carts and light transportation vehicles thereafter for use on path. That was it.
And then the added wordage that you read out.
Yeah, I just shortened it down to a couple words. And so that's the motion, would be
I'll
a
second.
second.
We have a second.
I guess.
Any more discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Nice, 2 7-0s.
We accomplished. Drinks are on me.
I'll have it on the 21st, the agenda, council agenda for first reading on the 21st. All y'all want to show up for that meeting? Great.
All right. Any old
Our
business?
meeting will be the 20th, right?
Thank you all for all that good discussion, and the audience, the gallery. Any old business? Any new business?
Motion to adjourn.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you all.
We got something done in